In 2012, Drake made a song titled The Motto, but what most people remember from it is YOLO. YOLO tells you to live in the moment, enjoy the life you have today, and not worry too much about tomorrow, because at the end of the day, you only live once. And hedonism. While Drake certainly popularized the motto, he wasn't the first to use the phrase, nor was he the first to come up with the idea of enjoying the pleasures of today without worrying about tomorrow. This idea has been around since the 4th century BC as what philosophers call hedonism, a school of thought created by Aristippus of Cyrene, a student of Socrates. Hedonism is the idea that the end goal of all our actions in life is to pursue pleasure and avoid pain. Aristippus believed that the only good course worth pursuing was one that would ultimately bring you pleasure. In today's society, we're taught that the way to succeed is to suffer today so you can enjoy tomorrow, to save for the rainy day. Once we get out of college, we're encouraged to find a job, work hard at a 9-to-5 for many years, live modestly, and save as much as possible so we can enjoy our retirement 50 years later. Aristippus didn't believe in any of that. He didn't believe in the idea of delayed gratification and always advocated for people to simply get pleasure from what is present and available. He was completely against the idea of suffering in the present to achieve something that only might be pleasurable in the future. For example, instead of telling students in college to study hard for their exams so they can land a good job after school, Aristippus would encourage them to fraternize, drink, and party lavishly, because these are the pleasures readily available to them. On one hand, you could see him as short-sighted and lacking foresight. After all, if you squander everything you have on the pleasures of today, you'll quickly run out of resources, and all of that pleasure will turn to pain. From people losing everything they had due to addiction, to others living in poverty as a result of laziness, we've seen the consequences of solely focusing on present pleasures. But on the other hand, there is some wisdom to this school of thought. Because, truly, tomorrow isn't promised to any of us. What's the point of working hard at a 9-to-5 for 50 years, ignoring all the pleasures of the time, only to die a few years before retirement? And let's say you do make it to retirement. The sad reality is that 1 in 4 people will have a disability by the age of 60, and the older you get, the higher the chances of that happening. Knowing all of this, is it still foolish to think that we are better off simply enjoying the pleasures we have in the present? Socrates and other philosophers of the time certainly thought so. Many philosophers hated the idea of hedonism because saying that the end goal of human existence is simply to pursue pleasure and avoid pain sounded vain. The Eurus. This opposition, combined with the rise of Christianity in ancient Greece, meant that this extremely rash idea of hedonism died with Aristippus. However, many years later, Epicurus, considered the father of modern-day hedonism, redefined what hedonism meant. And to do that, he started by redefining a certain word, pleasure. For Aristippus, pleasure was a state of ecstasy and excitement, the amazing feeling you have after biting into your favorite food or taking that first sip of coffee in the morning. For most of us, this is how we define pleasure, but not Epicurus. For Epicurus, pleasure was a state of tranquility. Instead of encouraging people to indulge in constant gratification, Epicurus believed the true meaning of pleasure was to overcome the fear of both death and God. Only then, he argued, could one fully enjoy what life has to offer. While Aristippus simply encouraged people to pursue pleasure, Epicurus believed that all human beings naturally strive to gain pleasure and avoid pain. He didn't need to encourage it because, according to him, it was already our natural state. To defend his point, Epicurus asked everyone to look at how babies view the world around them. They don't understand how the world works yet, but they understand 2 things: when something feels good and when something feels bad. When something feels good, the baby is joyful and happy. When something feels bad, the baby cries because it wants the pain to stop and to return to a pleasurable state. I'm sure at this point you're wondering, if we are all solely pursuing pleasure, what about selfless acts? acts that are done purely because they are virtuous or valuable for others, not ourselves. How do we explain those? Well, in hedonistic ideas, it's simply because those actions make people feel heroic, which is processed in the brain as a pleasurable feeling. So, at the core, it is still pleasure they are chasing, just not the kind we might initially think of. Pleasure. According to hedonistic teachings, there are two types of pleasure: moving pleasure and static pleasure. Moving pleasure occurs when you're in the process of satisfying a desire. When you're hungry, you eat. When you're thirsty, you drink. When you need a break, you take a nap. Static pleasure is the tranquility you feel once you've satisfied those needs. At this point, the adrenaline has finished coursing through your veins, and you're left with a sweet feeling of satisfaction. In that moment, you feel a sense of tranquility, and you keep feeling it until it is sadly replaced by pain, because, according to Epicurus, there is no in-between. The absence of pain is pleasure, and vice versa. But even with this more modest way of explaining hedonism, many people still disagree with and even frown upon the idea. And this is because of one thing: the belief that pleasure is the only source of intrinsic value. Think about it for a second. If pleasure is the only intrinsic value, then what do we make of things like finding meaning in life, achieving great things, building and maintaining long-lasting relationships, becoming a legend in a particular field, or even something as simple as living religiously or upholding a set of moral beliefs that we hold dear to our hearts? Hedonists might argue that all of these things do not hold any value in themselves and are only valuable because we derive pleasure from them. But something like upholding religious beliefs isn't always pleasurable. In fact, most of the time it restricts the kinds of pleasure you can experience. Yet it gives people a sense of fulfillment that, for them, is better than the pleasures they're forsaking. If self-pleasure alone is the aim of human existence, then people who benefit from the wrongs in our society would never fight against them. People would never fight for the common good when it might negatively affect them. And yet, every day, we see people set aside their own desires to help others. You don't have to wait until you're retired to start reaping the fruits of your labor. Take those vacation days. The promotion can wait a few more months. Stay on that call with your friends for an extra hour. Missing an hour of study won't make you fail. Because even if seeking pleasure might not be the ultimate goal of human existence, it's certainly a worthwhile pursuit.